So, fine. So I'm going to say a few words in hopes of luring the coffee drinkers back in. Professor Monshipouri is an experienced faculty member, and he doesn't need anybody like me to mediate questions or to point out who to recognize. He can run his own show. From the audience, please, no speeches, questions direct and to the point, and see what our guest has to say. So the floor is open.
I'll try one. Jerry, you got a mic coming, Jerry.
Do you think that we or Western policymakers should have better understood the consequences of the Arab Spring as we started down that path? Should it have been foreseen what the consequences might have been as they have unfolded?
Very good question. I think so, but like any other foreign policy, we haven't had much success in terms of predicting things coming this way. I remember that one of the most dominant view within the political science literature was the persistence of authoritarianism in the Middle East. That these people are resigned to this form, they think fatalistic, they do not have any aspirations for democracy, and people are kind of resigned to the reality of this. Egyptian people, ever since they know themselves, they were ruled since 1952 by military officers. But then again, the Arab Spring showed that that the Arab people have demands for democracy. They have aspirations. They want to redefine and reclaim their history. They want to create a public space so that they can participate. And nowadays we see al-Sisi in Egypt ridiculing politics. And by politics, I mean the definition of politics is competition, compromise, bargaining, party, interactions. You have to have a media, interactions. This is what the politics is. So the way al-Sisi is looking at civilian institutions and humiliating civilian institutions and ridiculing politics, that the line that al-Sisi uses is such a bankrupt, such an old and such a sort of devilish line. The line that he uses is, it's either us or chaos. You don't want us, expect chaos. And so, and one of the line that al-Sisi has is that, well, Egypt is not going to be ready for the next 25 years for democracy, so don't tell us how to run our country in terms of democratic performance. I attended a talk the other day at law school at Berkeley University. You have a bunch of Arab scholars, Khalid Fahmy from American University, Professor Hamza coming from, I think, Egypt. And they talk about the way that al-Sisi actually puts the youth, the civil organizations, put them down as if that, that the Egyptian people don't deserve democracy. They are used to living under autocracy and all these things. We should have predicted this coming, but I don't know what else could we do other than supporting those movements. But then again, in old-fashioned politics, you define what your geostrategic interests are, and then you make sure that you support the actors in other countries that are walking in line with those geostrategic things. Change has to come from within, and it's going to be a very slow process. But regardless of the consequences of the Arab Spring, one thing cannot be taken away from the Arabs, especially from Tunisian and Egyptians. And that is that people went to the street, adopted non-violent means, and set forth their, their goals. But the youth have to learn in Egypt that things are not going to change by going to the street. The decision of change and reform doesn't occur on the street. It happens on institutions. And unless you can organize and you can build institutions that they can question the authoritative power, the youth, the energy, and the networking, the Facebook, the Twitter, social media are very good in mobilizing. But after the game is over, you have to win. How do you win elections, organization, institutions? And the youth didn't have the initiative, didn't have the leadership, and all these things. So the problems should come from within. And I don't know, which government in the U.S. could have actually predicted that, the Republican government or Democratic government. Yes.
The question I have is about ISIS and what option the United States have. Next year, where we have a different government in the United States, and they are talking about total war and alienating. When that happens, we will alienate Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all the supporters, even Turkey. And then the Shiites in Iraq would be again dominant, and he was helping Iran. Really, what's the best option as an American to deal with ISIS? Long term, which will be benefiting both us and the Middle East.
Well, I don't know that we worked jointly with Professor Forsyth on an article for Georgetown Journal of International Affairs, and this was one of the questions we tried to address. There's this notion that is called offensive containment that combines a degree of limited military action, but it has to be supported by diplomatic and political relationship with the countries in the region. We can take limited action, but we have to work with countries like Saudis and other countries in the region, especially Iran, which is the major allies of USA. If for some reason United States' interest in defeating Daesh and Iran's intention to defeating Daesh overlaps. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter was very clear on that. There is an overlap between our interest and Iranian interest in this particular case, that you would like to go after Daesh. But Iranians have better credentials to go after Daesh than Saudis, because Saudis have promoted these Wahhabi Salafist ideologies that in some very indirect way, in some odd way, has strengthened the hands of. If you look at the doctrine of Daesh and the Saudi Wahhabis, they match, It's not like Saudis are actually interested in creating that. But at the end of the day, Daesh wants not just Syria and Iraq, they want Mecca and Medina. That confers more legitimacy on them if they can capture Mecca and Medina. So the Saudis, the Turkish and the Qataris who poured money into the pockets of some of the opposition group end up supporting Daesh sort of indirectly, and now they're faced with this paradoxical challenge coming after them to haunt them. I don't know what the solution for Daesh is. And I don't know what the United States actually looks at Daesh and considers Daesh to be really an immediate and clear present danger. Before the Paris attacks, it was not on the American priority radar. But after Paris attacks, things changed, and the United States felt like they have to go after them. I don't know how we can actually defeat them, other than actually local countries in the region should come to some degree of cooperation and agreement. And then if you have some kind of regional consensus, you can consolidate a consensus of that sort, and you might be able to defeat Daesh. Sometimes I feel the threat of Daesh is overrated. I don't look at Daesh and consider Daesh to be a threat. immediate threat to the geostrategic national interest of the USA. If it is of any direct threat, it is to the local countries, to the regional countries. So the solution should come from region. Iran can play a very important constructive role in doing that. The Saudis, they buy $90 billion worth of hardware from USA, but they haven't lost any person on the Syrian soil. Iranians have lost a lot of their leaders. At least on one account, 50 of major top officers have been killed in Syria. So what happens on the ground at the end of the day changes the picture. So Iranians are on the ground. Saudis have the F-14, F-16 that from a distance, and they want to actually address the problems, but ideologically they support them. So it's a very complicated situation to explain. I don't know how I can address these questions. Let me see. There was yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How does the U.S. sort out its role in Syria?
Badly.
I agree. I agree with John Mearsheimer. I'm not a realist by my training and my thinking, but John Mearsheimer says that for two reasons, or possibly three reasons, we should not get involved directly in Syria. Number one, we do not have a clearly defined geostrategic interest. Mearsheimer goes as far as saying that we don't even have an interest in Egypt. That's how far he goes. So he argues, number one, we don't have a geostrategic interest in Syria. We do not have a dog in that hunt. Why should we get involved? Number two, our involvement in Syria makes matters worse. It does not solve the problem. And when you combine this, and you find that the United States really does not have an immediate sort of interest, to the extent that Golan Heights, which has been captured by Israel, is safe, I don't think the partition of Syria or the territorial integrity of that would be something that Americans would be preoccupied with it strongly. What is happening in the Middle East is that the political landscape of the Middle East is changing. And the United States is becoming increasingly independent of the region's oil. By 2022, 2024 at the maximum, the United States is going to be totally independent and self-sufficient in terms of the oil which is coming from the region. Our dependency on the oil from Mexico and Canada will increase, but our dependency on the oil from Middle East actually will diminish considerably. And because we don't have any interest in we don't have any oil interest in the region, as long as we can control two things, skies and sea lanes, we do not feel compelled to put troops on the ground. And therefore, we are thinking about some kind of offshore balancing, possibly between Iran and Turkey. And the more moderates in Iran will win election, the more moderates will come to power, the more I can predict that the US interest and the Saudi interest are bound to diverge in foreseeable future. The end of 2016 means more rapprochement between Iran and USA, not in the traditional sense of opening embassies and all these things, but more a straight and direct line of communication between the politicians. And the more this happens, the more Iran becomes part of the solution, not part of the problem. And the more this happens, the more you see the divergence of the US and Saudi interests. So Iran and Turkey will be the two most important players of the region in terms of balancing and at times counterbalancing each other's. And the United States then wants to control the skies and sea lanes and then divert its attention to China. I think this is bound to happen. Yes.
Yeah, it seems like the numbers that you had up there for the total in ISIS, I believe, was 35,000. Let's say it's double that and it's 60 or 70,000. That's not a lot of people, if you, to the total population of the Middle East, was 300 million or something like that. And what is the reason, other than all these divisions within the Middle East, what is the reason that they cannot come together in some way, since this is such a great threat
Yes.
to their region, that they can't muster enough people to handle 30 to 60 to 70,000 people? Of all the armies and all of the equipment in totality over there, vastly outnumbers ISIS.
Because they have, that's a wonderful question. I've been invited to give a talk at UC Berkeley on April 4th, 5th on this topic. Thank you so much, getting me ready for that presentation. And I've thought about it long and hard. That's an excellent question. Because of the geopolitical interest of the regional players. What happens in Syria has three dimensions: local, regional, and international. The local situation, we know that there are oppositions to Bashar al-Assad, and we know what's happening. On the regional level, you have a situation in which Saudi and Iran do not see eye to eye, and they have this Cold War. Middle East is utterly at war with itself. Republican Party in USA. It's a thing that, we talk about that, David. The similarity is fascinating. And you have a situation in which the big players in the region, like Iran, which supports Bashar al-Assad, and Saudi, which wants to see, they want to see the downfall of that, they are involved in a Cold War, but they cannot fight with one another. So they take this proxy war to the turf of the third country, and that happens to be Syria. If there is an agreement between Iran and Saudi, and somehow Qataris and Turkey reach that consensus, I think ISIS can easily be defeated. But there are disagreements. Turkey opens its borders, which is 500 something, 50 miles. It'll open it up to everybody who wants to go in Turkey. In fact, Turkey wants to go to Syria and fight Bashar al-Assad. And they know some of these people are joining ISIS. They know for sure. But they leave all these borders open and they will go in there. Iranians are using Turkey because of their geopolitical interests. Iran and Turkey do not have much of a religious interest. Yeah, there are Alawites in Syria, but there are some Shiites in Iran who actually look at Alawites in Syria and they say, oh, these are not true Shiites. Because the Alawite men, they typically don't go to mosque. The Alawite women don't wear hijab. And they're very secular in their outfit, they all look. The reason that Iranians support Syria, because Syria provides a conduit through which passes material and financial assistance to Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's the bigger prize for Iran. And talk about religious and cultural and political affinity between Iran and Lebanon and Hezbollah. And then maybe using Syria to give weapons to Hamas if Iran desires to do that. But Hezbollah is much deeper ties there. Iranians' influence in Yemen has been really over-exaggerated, overstated. And Saudi now wants to actually have a Cold War with Iran. They go after Houthis in Yemen. And I'm sure one thing, that Saudi Arabia cannot afford to get dragged deeper into a Yemeni quagmire that cannot stabilize at its own will. That Saudis cannot actually stabilize Yemeni. So they go there in order to have a proxy war. Why, back to your point, why that 35 or 70 or 100,000 people, why countries in the region cannot defeat them? Because they have their own problems with one another, and they use this proxy war to settle accounts. If they agree on certain things, they might be able to actually resolve the problems. Saudis right now feel kind of threatened. They feel they're getting, the rough deal. They feel like they're being used by USA for 60-something years for the oil purposes, and now they're becoming dispensable. They're no longer indispensable. and the Americans are making some move towards rapprochement with Iran, and they're going to lose, so they want to stir up the pot and saying to the USA, the problems are deeper sectarian things, and don't still count us out of this situation. If there is an agreement on geopolitical things in the region, again, the threats of ISIS are really overrated. I don't think they present really a danger of a sort that could lead to some kind of change in geopolitical strategic calculations in the USA. Yes, and then I'll come to you, sir. Yes.
You want to pass this over?
I had often thought that there probably was some system that Daesh gets its money, and you just mentioned it today. Why do we never hear about that here?
We need organizations such as Conflict Armament Science and publications to come out and give us the details about what is going on. Who is selling oil and who's buying oil on the black market. What is going on? So we have to know that. And we need more, non-governmental organization to volunteer this information and enlighten us as to what happens. So I don't know exactly what is going on, but I think the information nowadays information is really available. It's incumbent upon us to actually look for solutions, seek information, be aggressive on our sort of digging deeper into the issues. We should not actually accept the news which is coming from Washington and read the newspaper accounts and be satisfied. Anytime you attempt to learn something, you are curious intellectually and professionally about it. And then the information actually is out there. We should go for that. And in this digital age that everything is online, there's no excuse for us not knowing what's going on. All right? We have to be curious. We have to have this acquisitive mind and go after the information and inform us, because I don't think government is going to voluntarily give us that information. And I don't think governments are in the business of sharing that information that could create questions in the minds of the people directed against the government. So it's incumbent upon us to aggressively go after information, try to analyze things, try to inform ourselves about the situations, so that we cannot buy into the, this campaign type of rhetoric about, kicking Daesh in the rear back or something like this, which is Republicans actually talking about it without actually giving us any solution. How do you actually go about doing this? Do you actually put troops on the ground, boots on the ground? Do you attack them from the air? And if you do that, I don't know whether you can actually settle this problem through the air. These are some of the problems that we have. I don't know exactly how I can answer that question. Yes, sir.
I want to push you a little bit into a hypothetical arena. I really appreciated that you pointed out by not underestimating the expertise that is held by the ISIS principles. They did fight under Hussein, and they're not just a ragtag bunch. They've demonstrated a clear understanding of symbolism in the way they've marshaled attacks to extend the sense of terror. So what's the likelihood or the possibility that they move beyond just symbolic terror and actually employ the existing stresses in the system to explode an already tense arena? For example, strains in Kashmir between Hindu nationalism and the substantial Muslim population. What's the likelihood of instigating an incident that they lay at the doorstep of the Pakistanis in the aftermath of the hotel explosion, so that they create an incendiary in the region that pulls attention in that direction? Are they capable of moving to that next level, beyond just symbolic terror to instigating a larger conflagration?
I don't know. I can't really truly honestly address this question. But look, they are in Libya already. They are in Afghanistan. If you beat them in Syria and Iraq, they will show up in Libya. They will show up in Tunisia. And the reason that they couldn't really be active in Tunisia because they were pushed out of Tunisia and they came to the northern part of Libya. Could they have any work with Boko Haram in Nigeria? Can they work on different projects? Yes, they do have different projects. They manage to, like mushrooms, to kind of come out of the ground in different places. Whether they will be involved in Kashmiri thing so that they can steer up the pot between Pakistan and India, two nuclear equivalent power, I don't know whether, look, the Pakistanis got their fingers burned in Afghanistan, the internal security issues of Afghanistan. And they invested heavily in Afghanistan. It hasn't had really much dividend for them. The way that Saudis felt like, well, if you go into Yemen and they can actually use military means in Yemen, then they can actually change and they can defeat Houthis. The Pakistani army experienced intervention in Afghanistan. It has not been really hasn't brought them effective results. So, are they going to allow the so-called Daesh penetrates their rank and then they actually steer up the pot that they have? Too much is at the stake between two nuclear equivalent power that to get into a confrontational mode and allowing a third party like Daesh to steer up the pot, I don't know that they will actually go that far. As it is, Pakistan and India are in a state of no war, no peace. And the political parties or leaders are kind of happy with a state of no war, no peace. Because it's like the status quo. I mean, the Kashmir issue will not be resolved. If the Palestinian issue is not going to be resolved for the foreseeable future, that's the story of the Kashmir as well. Whether they have any intentions or actually penetrating other vulnerable areas to mess up the region, I frankly don't think that they have capabilities of doing that as long as the states are protected and the borders are well maintained. The reason that they were able to kind of exploit the Iraqi situation was because the Iraqi government collapsed under the Maliki government. And the collapse of the Iraqi government provided an opportunity for them, opened an opportunity for them, and the few sort of gaps and voids here to fill in and to jump in and fill those gaps. In Pakistan and India, if 6 months from now there is a problem on that border and you see India and Pakistan going into some kind of conventional warfare because of Kashmir, they have an old history. I don't know to what extent Daesh could be blamed for that. There's a long history over there. I don't know what is the honest answer to your very fair question.
Your income slide for ISIS, Bloomberg Financial News published a report on the income for ISIS in the past year, and a factor that you didn't have was that the area in Iraq and Syria that they control represents at least half the wheat crop in Iraq and a large portion of the wheat and barley crop in Syria, and that the sales of those grains could represent 250 to 300 million annually, according to the Bloomberg report.
Yeah. Yes, well, I'm not aware of that. I don't know about the details of that report. I haven't read that. I think those areas that you mentioned are water stressed. I don't know to what extent they are really a booming area in terms of wheat productions and all that. Yeah. But if you're looking at the Dicle and Fırat, those two rivers that are coming from Turkey, Euphrates, and all those things, maybe they are really, they controlled Mosul and they wanted to control the dam. ISIS wanted to control the dam in Mosul, but the local governments and the Americans did not allow that to happen because they knew that if they control the flow of the water, I don't know, upstream or downstreams, once they control that, they could control the livelihood of the local people. But I think it was not a lot. And if this, if you're saying that, you know, and there's an element of kernel of truth to that, I haven't read the story, then that could really pose a major threat to both countries of Iraq and Syria in terms of the livelihood of the local people. Once Daesh controls the livelihood of the local people, then they can easily recruit, they can easily control the politics. That's what they do. They tax, they provide, you know, rules of the game, they bring girls from outside to create sort of a marriage situation to increase the population. They use all of these strategies. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. But I don't know the depth of that report. Yes, sir.
In your lifetime or in your children's lifetime, can you predict a separate Palestinian state in the geographic area?
No, unfortunately not. I have a friend by the name of Professor Mahmood Monshipouri, who is the director of international relations at Doha, Qatar, Georgetown. And he is publishing a book, which is coming by Yale University Press very soon, in which he argues that it is no longer practical for the Palestinians in West Bank to have an independent country. And here are the reasons. Number one, there have been so many settlements built in West Bank that West Bank looks like a village. Here, the Palestinians, next village, settlements, and then you have the Palestinian, and then you have the enclave of the Palestinian, and then you have settlements. It is no longer practical. He says for the practicality reason, two-state solution is no more. One-state solution, and even then, you have to create a democratic, secular system in which one man, one vote, one person, one vote, that applies. And then demographically, the Palestinians' population growth in 10 years is going to actually overtake the Jewish population in terms of the numbers. And so that's not also a possibility. So one-state solution has its own problem, but two-state solution is something which is no longer feasible, no longer practical, because it is not possible to have a region in which you have two village Palestinian, one settlement area, and then Palestinians. How can you actually... Palestinians are asking for a state which is contiguous, which is independent, has flag, passports, and all of these things, and has control over its resources. West Bank is very rich with water, and Israelis are not going to give up the entire West Bank because they are dependent on the water from West Bank. And they're not going to let go of that. And they're actually training a lot of international lawyers in New York and other places to claim that if you actually accept the one-state solution, then West Bank cannot be independent because of the dependency of the state of Israel on the water resources in West Bank. It is much more complicated than that. I'm simplifying things. But I look at the realities on the ground, and frankly, I'm not convinced that the Palestinian state, independent state, is in the offing. I do not see that in short to mid-range. I don't see that happening. It's no longer practical. So I used to be optimistic with regard to two-state solution. I've joined the skeptic camps, unfortunately, and that's the way I look at it. It's not practical anymore. Yes, ma'am.
Despite the 35-year history of what has gone on most recently in Iran and what you were citing about the current demographics of 70% there more or less of the population being 30 and under and being not as religiously devout,
Yeah.
is nuclear armament aside, is Iran an answer, or can it serve as a model for other countries to have a progressive, youthful, less radical population? I mean, I know it's not historically an Arab nation. It's Aryan and etc., but nonetheless, it's in the region and it's been a big power broker.
Absolutely, very good question. See, remember the Green Movement in Iran? Green Movement in Iran, 2009, a movement as a result of the fraudulent, disputed 2009 elections. The Green Movement in Iran preceded the Arab Spring by 2 years. So Iran is a sort of although it's a Shiite, it's a minority, not Sunni, but somehow I look at Iran as a trend setter for the rest of the Middle East. And it could be. The part of my answer to your question is that your question brought a smile on my face was, it touched my heart because I felt like, well, I have the same feeling that Iran kind of sets the trend, and the Green Movement happened before Arab Spring. But Iran in some ways is a different state. The sense of nationalism in Iran, very, very strong, very high. Iranians couldn't disagree on the political line, but at the end of the day, they know that they have to come and go through the huddles of their nationalistic things because they're strategically lonely, they're not part of NATO, they don't have any allies in the neighborhood. The Arabs in the south, they are not their friends. Big Bear, Russia is sitting in the north. Turkey is part of NATO. They look to the east. They face the two nuclear economic powers of Pakistan and India, and then to the east there's landlocked countries of Afghanistan. They look around and they see that they're unique, they are strategically lonely, and at the end of the day they kind of huddle through their nationalistic enclave. But different, but they're not really that different from the youth that I have met in the Middle East. And that I traveled the last 7 years, I've traveled 3 times to Egypt. The same demands on the street that I hear from the youth. They want social freedom, they want prosperity, they want, 80-90% of them in an interview said they think democracy is the best form of a government. So they have the same aspirations as the youth in Iran has. But Iranians have 3 identities. They are Islamic, they are Persians, and they're Europeans. And the identity of Iranian is an intersection of 3 identities. Iranians, hardly ever an Iranian denies the fact that they think Western, they believe in Western values, they cherish Western values. They are also Muslims, but they are not Arabs, they are Persian. And the kind of Islam they practice is Persianized Islam. It's a Shiite, which is very peculiar. So Shiites in Iran, and Shiites in Iraq, and Shiites in Bahrain, still different. Because Shiites in Iran Persianized Shiite. Yes and no to your question. Yes, the youth movement is a sort of regional sort of movement, and Iranians and our youth counterparts, they interact, they talk, they get ideas from each other. Iran can serve as a good model. No, because Iran is kind of different. In some ways, Iran is a sort of a different animal. It has a different context, historical context. It was not formally colonized. It is a long nation in terms of the civilization. It's very old, one of the oldest civilizations in the region. There are truly a nation-state because the sense of nationalism and fusion of the state and society has been there. It has been challenged via the secular or religious nationalism. But they're not shaky. They're not like a fake, a fragile state. They're very stable. They're old nations. Turkey is an old nation. Egypt is an old nation. But Jordan is not. Iraq is not. Syria is not. See that, Iran is different in some ways, and in some other ways, the youth, the energy has created a public space that has created a network of connections. They get ideas and all these things. Yes?
There seems to be a renewed interest in the present U.S. administration, at least, of reevaluating our relationship with Saudi Arabia. With what you have described, it seems like Saudi Arabia is not a key player really in even the near future of, the next few decades of the future of the Middle East. Could you share some of your insight on this reevaluation business?
I think in the short run, still Saudi is a key player. Look, it's the steel controls.
In the short run, sure.
In the short run. It's a key player because it controls the oil in the region. Chinese are very much dependent on the oil. Keep in mind that, speaking of BRICS country, that Professor Forsyth is actually working on it. Some of the BRICS countries, you know, we're talking about Brazil, India, China, you know, South Africa. They're still very much dependent on the oil, which is coming from Saudi. Chinese and Indian heavily dependent on oil. So, you know, Saudis have their hands deep into the pockets of Chinese. They're still dependency. Chinese know that Saudis is a key player. And it is, but in the long run, we're talking about, in the long run, once the U.S. dependency on oil in the Middle East is drastically reduced, then I think the public opinion in USA is going to ask the reasons for why American troops should go to Saudi in case Kuwait is invaded by Iraq. I don't think that we're going to have the replica of that situation in the future. I do not see that possibility. And Saudi had a deal that Roosevelt had with Al Saud back in 1940, 45, 46, 47, whatever the time was. That deal has run its course. And now you have a new player in the region which, by not designed by sheer accident, happens to have some overlap with US interests, and that happens to be Iran. And if you're going to have a stability in Iraq, stability in Afghanistan, some kind of resolution of the Syria situation, or some degree of control and stability in Lebanon, some of the keys are held by Iran, and we need to work with Iran. And if Iranians are sending us the gesture that are prepared to work with us strategically, then it makes perfect strategic sense to work with them. We don't have to actually look at them as sort of our enemies. Plus, you have a population in Iran which is strongly and very blatantly and openly pro-West, more generally, but pro-American very specifically. And that's the population of 80-something million people in Iran. In most of the Arab world, you have a population which is anti-American. The leaders are pro-American. In Iran, you have a reverse situation, and that situation is also changing. I think the United States is looking at Iran and they see the human investment there, the population, next generation, 30 years from now, 20 years from now. And see that population is pro-West, pro-American, and they see that they can actually work, they can invest in those, and maybe they can bring them on their side. But then again, I think the U.S. for the next 20 to 30 years is going to be heavily preoccupied with China. And Middle East is losing its place in the broader political landscape of global geopolitics. Excellent question.
We have certainly increased our knowledge of a complicated part of the world, so join me in thanking Professor